Hello.
Hello สวัสดีค่ะ
Hello. How are you today?
I'm good.
Great. You Sipti is excited today because of the goldfish, right? No. Okay. No. No.
Still full.
Questions for us
What does
today?
have a sheep or sheep day? Sheep day. Sheep.
Sheep day. I've never heard of sheep day. Maybe shitty day.
Probably.
Shitty.
Bad day.
Yeah.
Right.
Shitty means bad.
Shitty.
Shitty
day.
Yeah. Shit is a bad word for poop.
Oh.
So shit day would be like a poop day. It means a really bad. Shit added to anything. Shitty life. This tastes. You can say these goldfish taste like shit. That's rude, but that's a common way to describe something. It means that it's bad. You can say you can
Have
tell
a bad
someone.
day.
Yeah, I'm having a shitty day. You look like shit. You can tell people they're ugly. You say,
That's rude.
Yeah, that's rude. Yeah, definitely.
That woman in movie I watched.
Not that woman.
One
A
woman.
girl.
A girl.
Girl.
A girl. In that movie.
In a movie.
In a movie. She is bad girl. A bad girl.
Okay.
She likes to yell.
She likes to.
She likes to yell at other people
Okay.
and selfish.
And she's
Selfish.
selfish. That could be true. Then that seems like a good thing for her to say. But I've never heard of sheep day. Sheep. Bah. I don't think it could be sheep.
Sheep.
Maybe. Cheap day. Cheap
Poor.
means no money.
Yeah, because
So-
she is rich girl.
Okay.
And she didn't stay in line before. Line.
Stand.
Stand in line to buy coffee.
Okay. But that doesn't mean it's a cheap day.
She yelled at other
She-
people. She yelled at other people in that line.
Okay. And she said,
She said, "Don't hate me or something. Don't hate me, and have something and have a cheap day." Like that.
I don't think you can tell someone to have a cheap day. A cheap day would be you don't spend any money.
Probably shitty.
Yeah, probably. But it's strange that she would tell other people to have a shitty day. She might say, "I'm having a shitty day," but it depends.
She bad. She is bad
Okay.
person.
Well, anyway, I don't know. Definitely not cheap. It could be cheap. It could be shitty. But we don't know. We could also have a cheap, shitty day. Also, that could be. That could be if the cameras turn off early, like in the beginning of the show. Anyway, we're having a cheap, shitty day today. And do we have another question?
No.
No. Okay, then let's continue with our last exciting story. What do we call it?
John's painful story.
History lessons.
History lesson.
Right. Full of confusion, Sipti yawning,
But I like this part.
forgotten dates, lies, mix-ups. I remember one time I said the sun was 8 light minutes from the earth.
And I don't know.
Oops. Made a mistake. Racism, bigotry, hatred, all of those things. This is the last lesson. This is very hard. I didn't know if I wanted to do it because it's very difficult, but so many people have asked me about this that when I was a teacher that I think I should try, but it's very difficult. So we'll see how it goes. Anyway, last one, you've seen him on some of the other videos. Just remember, this is my review. It's not necessarily all correct. This is things that I was taught, things that I heard, and so it's not necessarily the truth. So be careful. If you want to listen to a real history lesson, you should watch a professional history show. But this is my interpretation of what I think average people might have been told growing up in the United States. Anyway, who is this person? You probably saw him in some of the other videos because I skipped through the pages.
Done.
And you might have seen him. The last one for our lessons. Who is this? Why don't you show people? Who is that?
Probably I saw him just 1 or 2 times on.
Show people so they can see.
On
Who
Facebook
is it?
Place.
Yes, of course.
But
yes.
I don't know this guy.
Do you have a guess? What do you think he does?
He looks like a principal. No.
A what?
No.
Princess?
No.
What?
I forgot.
Okay. He looks...
Looks like ประธานาธิบดี
What's that?
like Obama.
Oh, okay.
What do you call? Not principal. No.
Leader? President?
President.
Oh, president? Oh,
President.
yeah, that's a good guess. Yeah. No.
But
No.
who's that? Who is
Yes.
this
Okay,
guy?
so this is Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King. He's not a king. His name, in America, we have some people who are named King. It's just a last name. He's not a king, but his name is King. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. And his dad is Martin Luther King Sr. So if you have the same name as your father, then you are junior. It's usually just for boys, though. I haven't heard anyone being named junior
Like
if they're a girl.
Michael Jr.
Michael Jr., yeah, could be. And then their dad would be Michael Sr. So if your dad has the same name as you, then we name junior and senior. If there are many people in the family, then we would say Michael the Third. So if your dad and your grandfather were also called Michael, then you would be Michael the Third.
Third, but not junior. Or
No,
third
because
junior.
your dad would be junior. It only works for senior and junior, only for 2. If it's more, then you would be the third, the fourth, the fifth. Yeah, like that. Anyway, this is very difficult because this is talking about racism in the United States, right? So when one race, like Thai people, hates another race, people from Myanmar or people from China, right? This is called racism. So the problem of racism in the United States is very difficult. And the problem is that you don't benefit from talking about racism. If you talk about racism and you're very smart, which I'm not, but if you're very smart and you talk about racism and you do a great job, then people say, okay, whatever, man, be quiet. Don't talk about that. If you make a mistake, if you say something wrong, which I will, if you say something rude, then people are really mean and they'll fight you or they'll threaten you. So there's no real benefit to trying to talk about racism. In the best case, people just say, okay, shut up. And in the worst case, you get killed. So talking about racism is very difficult. And I thought about it for a long time. I thought, should I try? And I thought, I have to try because people ask me all the time when I used to be a teacher, and probably Sipti will want to know. Sipti likes to listen to gangster rap, so she could get in trouble if she doesn't understand. And a lot of countries don't understand. So I remember there was a cartoon from Japan that they tried to explain Black Lives Matter, which, remember on the show you asked me about George Floyd a long time ago on the show. I didn't know about it. You saw it on the news, but there was protests in the United States, and you asked me about it, and I didn't know about it at that time.
Police about George.
And in Japan, one of the TV channels tried to explain to Japanese people what was going on, and they had this angry black guy, screaming and yelling about things, and everyone got really angry at them. I'm not surprised, because trying to describe these things is very hard, and if you don't grow up in the United States and you don't understand what racism is and what it looks like, it's very difficult to explain. It's not funny, it's not easy to joke about, and if you try to make it simple for kids, it doesn't usually work. Anyway, so remember, my review, my history lesson is not necessarily perfectly accurate, but it is full of mistakes and forgotten dates and times and everything else. Anyway, so let's learn about Martin Luther King. So Martin Luther King was born, Michael King Jr., January 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. So if you remember in our other lessons, 1929 was the Great Depression, kind of the beginning of the Great Depression. Remember, the Great Depression is when the stock market went down in the United States, and everyone was really poor for a long time, maybe 10 years probably or longer. He was born in the beginning, towards the beginning of the Great Depression. So it was difficult times in the United States, probably when he was a young kid. So he was African American. That means his family, not his mom and his dad probably, but his great-grandfather, his great-great-grandfather were brought to the United States as slaves in ships to work on the plantations in the United States for cotton or for crops, for growing things. American people were too lazy. British people were too lazy to
Like me.
to work, so they needed strong people, and they brought people from Africa. For about 300 years, from about 1619 until 1807, African people were brought to the United States to work as slaves. They didn't get any money. They weren't treated well. They were killed or beaten if they didn't work, and they were treated horribly. That was slavery in the United States. Nobody really knows exactly when slavery started, but some people believe that it began with a ship called the White Lion, and 20 African slaves were brought to the United States. Some people believe that was the beginning. It was a Portuguese ship, and it was called I don't know how to pronounce it, Baoista, Sao João Baoista or something. I don't know what it is in Portuguese. I can't pronounce it. But anyway, it went to Jamestown, Virginia, which was a British colony at that time. Remember, the British and the Spanish and the Portuguese came to America when they found the land. Remember, we learned during the Statue of Liberty. They came to the United States because they thought that it was China, And when they realized that it was a new land, then they tried to take it as quickly as they could by killing Native Americans and bringing African slaves to work in the fields. So that was for 300 years. People were brought. I don't know how many. I didn't see any numbers. I have no idea how many people, but a lot were brought to the United States. In 1807, there was an act that the government of the United States implemented to stop new slaves from being brought to the United States. But it didn't allow slaves to be free. It just stopped new slaves from coming to the United States. Slavery was not just in the United States. Slavery was in South America, in Brazil, in France, in Britain. There was slavery of African people from many countries, not just the United States. But the United States had probably a lot more than in some other countries. So, as you remember, there was a civil war in the United States. Civil war means a war between the people of that country. If you have a war against another country, then that's just a war. A war against China, a war against Japan, a war against Vietnam. That's a separate war. A civil war is when the United States fights the United States, or Thailand fights Thailand. The north of Thailand fights the south of Thailand, or whatever, the east. That's a civil war. We had a civil war in the United States over slavery. So the north of the United States tried to end slavery, but the south of the United States, where most of the farms were, wanted to keep slavery because they wanted free people to work. So in the north, there weren't as many farms. So it was easier for the north of the United States to say, this is not the right thing, we should stop slavery. But the South said, well, we want people to work for free. So they didn't want to end slavery as easily as people in the North did. So there was a war in the United States that we call the Civil War in 1860, and the North won. If you remember, I talked about that in some other of our stories. And the Southern president, remember, he was in a dress. He got captured. He tried to run away. He was captured. Anyway, the South lost the Civil War, and then slavery was ended. But it didn't mean that African people had a good life. The slavery was ended, but they didn't have any money. They didn't have any education. They couldn't vote. They had nothing. So they were free to walk around, but there was nowhere to go. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any education. So for a long time, we had what is called segregation. So segregation means, okay, black people have to stay over here, and white people have these places over here.
Who take care of black people? Because
what do you mean, who?
Because they don't have home.
Right, exactly. So they had to get bad jobs. They got paid now, but it was very small. And the government actually was supposed to give them some money at the end of slavery. I don't remember exactly. It was like 40 acres, some land, and a horse or a donkey or something they were supposed to get, each person. But I don't know why, but they didn't get paid at all. And so they all had to just start their lives from nothing. But the white people who owned the plantations and all of the businesses had all of the money, and they had nothing. Some of them succeeded, a few, but most couldn't. And most were poor, and still today are very poor, living, as you saw in the Eminem movie in Detroit, because as you remember, before slavery ended, some people were trying to go up to Canada to escape slavery, to run away from their slave owners. And so they went to that area in Detroit because they were trying to go up into Canada. And that's
like
why,
in that movie.
yeah, in 8 Mile. So that's why you see there's a lot of African American people in Detroit and in that area in the movie. So anyway, after the Civil War, slavery ended, but it wasn't good. It was still, African American people were still poor and they were treated badly, especially in the South. So in some states and cities in the South, if white people didn't like them or thought that they were criminals or something, that they would be killed or they would be beat up or injured. And the police, they said, didn't help them at all and were never on their side. So if there was a white guy and a black guy who got in a fight, probably the police would say, okay, the black guy is the criminal. Right? For a long time. So also the problem is that black people couldn't vote. African American people couldn't vote. So they were free, kind of, but they couldn't vote. So they couldn't change any of the rules in the United States because they couldn't vote for a president who would support them.
Still now?
No, now because of this man, things changed. That's why we're learning about Martin Luther King. So one of the main problems after the Civil War was that black people, African American people, couldn't vote. At that time, even Martin Luther King used to call himself and African American people as Negro. If you listen to him in his videos, he says Negro. Negro is
a bad word, right?
No, the bad word we will learn in the last bad word
One of
list.
my friends said if you said Negro to black people, they will hurt you.
Well, it depends. Negro is not the horrible word. There's another one that's bad, that's even worse. Negro is now bad, but it wasn't at this time.
At a time.
Even Martin Luther King used to say that he was a Negro. He said Negro. Negro comes from the Spanish word, it means black, I believe. It might be a Portuguese word or something. I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, at that time, when Martin Luther King was alive, he was born in 1929, at that time, people called black people or African American people Negroes. Nowadays, people don't say Negro anymore. And the Thai translation, though, I think is still Nego or something.
Yes.
Right? And that was probably translated from that time. But nowadays, that Negro has become a bad word, and it's not polite to say. So you probably don't want to use the Thai translation because it sounds like the English word, and it's not polite anymore. But there are books and there are still videos from those times that use that word. And at that time, it was not bad. Like I said, Martin Luther King used to say that Negro people should stand up or demand rights or sit in facilities or whatever. Anyway, so Martin Luther King, his father and his grandfather were both preachers in the church. So the people who are in the church that say that when you go to church on Sunday, usually Christian people go to church and there's a guy who stands
Father?
there. Not father, but there's a guy who usually stands and says, welcome, and tells you about God, gives a sermon. That person is a preacher.
Then who take care of church?
Usually yeah, maybe, but it's more about speaking and telling you the Word of God, teaching you about the Bible, teaching you about Christianity if you go to church on Sunday. So him and his dad and his grandfather were all preachers in the Roman Catholic Church. in their, I don't know if they all lived in the same city, but well, in their homes, in their hometowns where they lived. Martin Luther King was very smart. He was a very smart kid. He skipped 9th and 12th grades, not because he couldn't do it or because there was something wrong, because he didn't need to go. And he went to college when he was very young. I think he was 15 years old or something like that, in 1948. So he was very, very young when he went to college. At that time, not all African American people could go to all colleges. Some colleges didn't allow African American people to come to the college. They said only white people allowed. And so he was allowed to go to some colleges. He went to college. I think he went to Boston University, but that was later. I don't know when he went for his master's degree or just college degree, if that was in a university as big as Boston University or not. I don't remember which one he went to. But anyway, he went to Boston University to get, I think it was his doctorate degree, but I'm not sure. And there in the university, he met his wife, which her name is Corella Scott, and they married in 1953. They had 4 kids, and I don't know where they are now. I haven't seen any videos or stories about them, but I think that they must have grandkids or something that are still alive.
With same Negro or
No, we don't want to say Negro. African American. African American woman. Yes, her name was Corella Scott. Yes. And yeah, you don't want to say Negro. It's not horrible. I'm going to teach you the bad word next time. But nowadays,
African American.
yes, or you could say black, because black people could come from Africa. They're not African Americans. And people from France who are black are not African Americans. So it's okay to say black. It's okay to say African American, but it would be rude in many cases to say Negro. Anyway, but remember, at that time it wasn't, and that's why the Thai translation is from this time. It was probably translated a long time ago. So he became a doctor of systematic theology. I don't really understand the difference between systematic theology and theology, but anyway, he was 26 years old when he became a doctor of theology, and that's like the study of religion in university. So it's more complicated than that, but you can imagine that it's like the study of religion, maybe all religion, about the start of the universe and religion through time, different ages, Christianity 100 years ago, 500 years ago, things like that. And he became a doctor of systematic theology. So he was a doctor, but not
biology.
No, theology.
Theology is about what?
It's not religion.
Religion. Doctor religion.
Yes. So about the history of religion.
But why do we say doctor?
Because in America, we can become a doctor of any science. You can be a math doctor. Yes.
High class.
Yes. You can be a math doctor. You can be a science doctor. You can be a doctor of aeronautical engineering. It doesn't matter. We call a real doctor a medical doctor, MD. That's a medical doctor. He is not a medical doctor, but we still call him Dr. Martin Luther King. But he cannot fix your body. He couldn't fix your body if you got injured or something like that. He was just a doctor of theology, not a doctor of medicine. When he was in college, he read about Mahatma Gandhi. Do you know who Mahatma Gandhi was? Mahatma Gandhi was a very famous Indian person who fought the British with non-violence. So instead of fighting a war with guns and swords, everyone in his army just stood in front of the British and refused to listen to them. Said, we're not going to follow you. And sometimes the British would beat them or kill them, but that's called pacifist or non-violence. You fight people without using guns. You just don't listen to them.
How can they win?
It's very hard, but if the other side realizes that they're doing something wrong, then they will hopefully change their opinion. Nonviolence doesn't work against everyone, but it does work if the leaders are smart enough, like Martin Luther King and like Gandhi. So we call that nonviolence. So if you fight someone with nonviolence, then you just don't listen to them. You don't follow their rules, and they tell you, okay, you have to be a slave, and you say no. But you don't fight them, you just refuse to follow their rules. And you boycott, you say, I'm not going to buy products from you, or I'm not going to use your company, or I'm not going to go there. That's a type of nonviolence. So Martin Luther King read the teachings of Mahatma Gandhi when he was in school, and he realized that this was a better path to trying to get the government of the United States to change rather than trying to fight a war with guns and with swords or with knives or violence. So we call that type of person a pacifist. Someone who won't fight even if someone tries to fight them. That we call that a pacifist. So he was a pacifist. Then there was a very important event that happened in the United States on December 1st, 1955. So how many years ago?
What again?
1955.
1955. 55. Right now.
2021.
17.
Yeah, like 70 years ago. Exactly. Rosa Parks, there was a lady, her name was Rosa Parks. If you listen to American TV shows or radio or anything, you will hear of Rosa Parks, a very famous lady. At that time, African American people could not sit on the bus if a white person wanted the seat. The rule said that black people had to sit in the back of the bus, or if they could sit on the seats, but if a white person got on the bus, then they had to get up. That was the law. And it was a law. It wasn't like a rule, like people being mean. It was an actual law. If you didn't follow the law,
From government.
then the police could give you a fine. So there's a difference between people who are rude, who try to force people to listen to them, and actual government rules. This was a government rule. It wasn't like white people were saying, okay, you need to sit in the back of the bus. This was a government law. And so that's racism, right? There was a lady, her name was Rosa Parks. She was an African-American lady, and she refused to get up. So there was a white guy who got on the bus, and he wanted her seat, and she said no. She was arrested by the police, but that started the revolution
Other people.
that Martin Luther King became the leader of. So after that event, many people started to realize that there was a problem. It happened in Montgomery, Alabama, in the south of the United States, and that was, remember, in the south of the United States was where people didn't really want slavery to end. So even though slavery ended, in the south of the United States, there are still now, but at that time much more, racism and inequality. not equal facilities. So, like I said before on the show, there was a big problem in the court of the United States. The number one court is called the Supreme Court. Supreme means biggest. The Supreme Court had a law which said equal but separate. And
separate.
Separate means like this. Separate, not together. So they said, okay, it's okay to have a black school and a white school, but they can't be the black school poor and the white school rich. Because we have other problems in the United States of each state having different laws. And the federal government, the big government, doesn't want to make laws for every state. So they try, if they can, to allow each state to have their own laws, as long as those laws don't become criminal or doing something bad. In Alabama and in some other states that Martin Luther King said were too far in the past and had not learned about equality, Alabama was one of them. It was a very difficult place for African American people to live. They weren't treated very well, and Martin Luther King said in some videos that he was not allowed to go to pools when he was a kid. When he grew up, he couldn't go to a pool. Black people were not allowed in the pool until the YMCA came to his town, and it was a black YMCA. It was not like he could go to the white YMCA. There was a special one for black people. So, like I said, the problem was that the Supreme Court didn't want to force people to stay together. They thought that it would be okay to have a law that said, you can separate if you want, you can have a Thai school if you want, you can have a Chinese school if you want, but it cannot be better or worse than another school. But what happened is that they were worse. The black schools, the African American schools, and the buses and the facilities where black people could go were always horrible or didn't exist.
Because they don't have money.
Because it was not equal. Because they had no money and the government did not support them. The government...
They can do the same white people.
As
white people.
Yes, they couldn't vote, and they couldn't go to many facilities, couldn't go to good schools, couldn't go to the right university, to good universities to change. So she was arrested. Rosa Parks was arrested because the laws said that black people had to give up their seats on the bus to white people. After that, a community was formed to have a seat boycott. Boycott means we're going to say no. So all African American people said, and many white people also said, this is not okay, and we're not going to go on the buses anymore to protest these laws. And at first, it didn't go in the news and it wasn't important, but over time it became more and more popular and on the news, and many people in the United States started to realize that there was a big problem.
They changed the law.
Well, not yet. That's what this person is going to do. So a community was formed. A community means a group, to try to boycott and to say no, this is wrong. We're not going to follow these rules. And sometimes African American people would go and do what Rosa Parks did and sit in the seats that they weren't supposed to sit in, and when the police would come, they would arrest them and take them to jail, and there started to be a big problem formed by people protesting these
Just
racist laws.
them to jail, but they have to pay for something or have to stay in jail for a long time or not.
Well, some of them were beaten, some of them were hurt, but I don't think that the laws were really bad. Like I don't think that they had to stay in jail for their whole life, but they were stupid. They were racist laws, and they were fined or they had to pay money, or I don't know exactly what the rules were. It probably was different
But not
in different states.
heavy.
I don't think it was very heavy, but it depends, because if the police were corrupt or racist and they wanted to beat someone or kill someone, then it could have happened, right, at that time. So Martin Luther King became the leader of that group when he was 26 years old. So there was a group of people, African American people and some white people, who formed this nonviolent group to try to change the bus laws, and Martin Luther King became the leader of that group. In many videos, people asked him, why did you become the leader? He said he didn't know. Maybe no one else wanted to do it, or because he was a very good speaker. So if you watch videos of Martin Luther King, he was a very, very good speaker, because he was a preacher. He used to talk in the church seminars all the time, and he became very good at speaking, and he was naturally very good at it. If you watch videos of him, he has a lot of energy. He speaks very calmly.
Like you.
He has more energy than me. He was much smarter than me. His arguments are very, very good. When you listen to him talking, he could argue with you and not make you angry. Even if you disagreed with him, after you listen to him talk for a while, he can convince you, because he just has better, he explains it in a better way, and he doesn't attack you. He doesn't say things mean. He doesn't say like, well, you're an idiot, or that's because you're stupid. He never said anything like that. He was very respectful, but he was very confident and very strong. He was a very, very special guy. I really like Martin Luther King a lot. If I didn't, I would tell you. I don't care if people think I'm racist or not. I have nothing to protect. But I really like Martin Luther King. He was a very tough guy, and he could have fought a real war. He was like a general. If he wanted to, he could have fought a real war. But instead, he chose to not fight. And I think that's very, very special. It's very hard to find someone like that who can fight, but chooses not to. Many people, they say they're pacifists because they're not strong. But Martin Luther King chose to be a pacifist. And that is very special, in my opinion. Anyway, he became the leader of that group, and he became famous in the United States and all over the world, actually, at that time. People in the rest of the world were outraged by what was going on in the United States. People didn't know about these buses and this segregation before Martin Luther King and before it became on the news. People thought that black people might be treated badly, but they never heard about it. They didn't know about it, and they didn't think about it. But Martin Luther King and everyone in the boycotts and in the protests, they started to bring people's attention. And a lot of people in other countries started to get angry at the United States for not changing the laws. So the government of the United States started to have a lot of trouble because they didn't know how to fix the problem. They didn't know if they should force everyone to be together, if they could maintain some type of state laws where states could choose. But some states were, especially in the South United States, were very racist. And so it was very hard for the government of the United States to make laws for everyone.
Problem still now.
not as bad, but yes, still now there are still problems. But it's at this time it was much worse, and before this time it was much worse during slavery. So on November 13th, 1956, the Supreme Court decided that the bus segregation was illegal, and that was 1 year after Rosa Parks. So Rosa Parks, remember, she sat down, she didn't get up from her seat, and that started people protesting. And then a year later, the United States Supreme Court decided that bus segregation was illegal, and they stopped every police force in all states from arresting people who were black or who were African American who wanted to sit in the different seats. It was illegal for someone to be arrested because of sitting in a different seat. And Martin Luther King said that it was very humiliating because he said black people had to get on the bus from the front, pay the same amount of money as white people, but then they had to go to the back of the bus through the back door. So it wasn't even like they got to pay less. Maybe if you pay less, you sit in the back, that's okay. No, they had to pay the same amount of money and they had to sit in the back. So that's, nowadays that's ridiculous, but at that time, no one talked about it and no one cared, right? And so there was a lot of racism in the United States, still now, but maybe not as bad as at that time because of Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King was very good at talking about racism. Like I said, me talking about racism is not a good idea because in the best case, you'll see people saying, John, you're an idiot. And in the worst case, you'll see people
come to you.
very, very angry at me. But Martin Luther King was very good at talking about racism. You have to be very, very smart. And he was. He did a great job. Anyway, in 1957, Martin Luther King and others formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was called the SCLA, and its purpose was to try to teach other African American people to be leaders, to create more protests, more boycotts, and more sit-ins to try to get the government to change the laws in some states and in Washington. So remember, in the United States, not all states had very racist laws. In some states, there were racist laws. Black people had to only use these facilities, but in some states, it wasn't that bad. The purpose of this group or this is a group. Their purpose was to teach other African American people to be like Martin Luther King and to teach them how to deal with the police, how to deal with the laws, what would happen if they were arrested, how to organize a protest, and how to get people to join the cause to fight racism. Martin Luther King was arrested many times. He would go on protests. Do you know what a protest is? That's when everyone has signs. They say, you need to stop. Don't do this anymore. That's a protest. Sometimes it becomes violent and the police fight with protesters. The people in the protest are called protesters. Those are the people. The thing is called a protest. In the United States, because of the Constitution, we are supposed to have the right to protest anywhere at any time. So Martin Luther King was arrested many times, and he was stabbed one time very badly. He almost died when he was signing books in 1958. Some lady, I don't know, I can't remember exactly what he said, but I remember listening to him talk about it. He said there was a lady, I think she was an African American lady, came and asked him about something about his book or something, and he said he didn't look up. He just answered her yes, and she had a knife and she stabbed him in the stomach, and he almost died. He was in the hospital for a long time, and he was very close to dying, but he survived, and he continued on with his work. He was a very religious man. He believed in Christianity, and he was a preacher, right? He went to school for theology. He was very, very much a Christian person. In 1960, as you remember, John F. Kennedy was elected. So remember John F. Kennedy? We learned about John F. Kennedy when we talked about the moon. Remember, he said that we need to go to the moon to beat the Soviet Union. Remember, the Soviet Union is Lenin.
Because Soviet did before.
The Soviet Union sent up Yuri Gagarin, and the United States was afraid that communism would beat capitalism. If you remember, the Soviet Union sent up the first cosmonaut into space, and the space race began. That's the story we heard about the moon landing. So John F. Kennedy was the president of the United States at that time, and he wanted to go to the moon. But another thing that he did, the reason why a lot of people wanted him to become president, was because he supported Martin Luther King and changing the laws in the United States to allow black people to vote, which was very important. Because if you can't vote, then you can't change the laws that are racist. So a lot of African American people voted for John F. Kennedy because they thought that he would be a younger president. He was less conservative, and they thought that he would do a better job of changing the laws in the Supreme Court to stop small states in the United States from being racist. So remember, in some small states, segregation was allowed, and a lot of people thought that the only way to fix it is for the Supreme Court, the big court, to force everyone in the United States to follow anti-racist rules, or to stop racism on the buses and schools and universities and things like that. So in 1963, Martin Luther King had a protest in the worst oppressive city, he thought, which was Birmingham, Alabama. So at that time, like I said, there were some states that were more racist than others, and he said that Birmingham, Alabama was one of the worst. So he brought a lot of protesters to that city and that town and tried to get the government and the local government of that area to change their laws that were racist. He was arrested many times and beat up many times, beaten. A lot of the police in the United States at that time used to spray people with water hoses. They would get hurt, and also they would send dogs to try to bite them. They had police dogs that were trained to catch criminals, and they would let them try to attack African American people who were protesting or who were trying to sit down on the bus or whatever. They would send the dogs to attack them and to bite them. He was arrested during that protest, and John F. Kennedy, the president, helped him to get out of jail. So the president of the United States had to come to the help of some of the protesters.
The president at that time is white people.
Yes.
White person.
John F. Kennedy. Yeah, his name was John F. Kennedy. He was very young. He was younger than other presidents. Usually presidents in the United States are much older, like President Trump. I think he's 70, over 70 years old. John F. Kennedy was pretty young. I think he was 30 something. I can't remember how old he was. Anyway, on May 10th, 1963, there was a lot of anger and outrage from the government, the big government of the United States, not the small governments in each city, and also from around the world. People were very angry about the police beating and attacking African American people and also protesters. It wasn't just African American people. There was also many white people who supported their cause, but they definitely were not in the same numbers as African American people. But it wasn't just all black people. There were definitely some other people in the protests as well. And people around the world got very angry at the United States, got very angry at the local small police who were sending the dogs and attacking protesters. And so eventually the government and the federal government, the big government, got so angry and started to complain so much that the people in Birmingham, Alabama, and the police force there had to change their laws and to stop attacking the protesters. Eventually, on August 28th, 1963, during the March on Washington to support civil rights legislation, King gave the very famous speech, "I Have a Dream." So, in August 1963, there was a huge protest. It's called a march sometimes. People walk from one area to another area. It's called a march, and it's to support something. They have signs or they say, we need to change this or to do this. And if a lot of people join, then people think, okay, this is important. And the news and the TV stations go there, they interview people, say, what are you doing? And they get to talk and they say, we're trying to protest these laws. So Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy, the president, were I don't know if they were good friends, but they spoke many times, and many people in the United States thought that John F. Kennedy supported the civil rights legislation. Legislation is when the government of the United States is trying to make a new law. Before it becomes a law, or before it becomes the rule, it needs to be decided first. And this legislation, we don't know exactly what the rule is going to be. Is this going to be allowed? Is this going to be allowed? The politicians in the United States, they fight over what the rule should be. At that time, Martin Luther King and John F. Kennedy wanted to have civil rights legislation to try to change the voting rights, but also other laws in the United States as well. But mainly, I think, to change the fact that African American people couldn't vote. That was one of the biggest problems in the United States. Couldn't vote. They couldn't elect, or they couldn't vote for people who supported changing the rules. So if you can't vote, then how can you change the laws, right? So that was one of the most important things, but there were other things as well. Anyway, he gave a very famous speech. He got up, and you can watch it online. You can see Martin Luther King, "I Have a Dream" speech, and it's one of the most famous speeches that people know from the United States. I've heard it many times, and I remember very clearly when he says, free at last, thank God Almighty we are free at last." So in his speech, though, he wasn't talking he wasn't saying that African American people were free. He was saying that I hope someday that we will be able to say this. So it's not that he
free
thought
at last
free at last. Free at last. That means now
Finally.
finally free. But it doesn't mean that he thought that things were okay. He was just saying that I hope someday that we will be able to say this. But it's a very famous speech, and you will hear people saying, free at last, in jokes. So nowadays, people use this because it was a very famous speech, it was very important, and nowadays people use it as a joke for things that are not important. So for example, like if your mom never lets you go out and party, and then finally you get to go out, you might hear some American people say, free at last, free at last, and they're joking that they were like a slave. And I don't think it's rude to say that. It's usually just in private, but I'm saying you will see or you will hear people use that saying, and they are remembering Martin Luther King's speech. I don't really think that it's rude, but you know, it's a little bit rude because he was talking about something very important, and if you just say it about, you know, not being able to go out at night, it's a little bit rude. But I don't think that it's gonna make anyone too angry. But you never know. I'm not as good as Martin Luther King at talking about these things. Anyway, John F. Kennedy, the President of the United States, finally, he had a lot of trouble with the Soviet Union and with Russia, Cuban Missile Crisis. There was a lot of trouble for him, but eventually, he and Martin Luther King decided that it was very, very important for the United States to pass a law to change some of the racism and hatred in the United States by forcing small local governments in the United States to change some of their racist laws. And when he did that, his popularity went down. So many people didn't want him to pass those laws. So many people supported Martin Luther King, but when it came to actually changing the laws, people didn't like John F. Kennedy's determination. They thought probably the laws should be changed, but maybe in 50 years or 100 years, not now. But he said, we can't wait. It's killing people. It's not acceptable, and so we have to change these laws now. But when he said that, a lot of people in the United States didn't like the idea. They didn't want things to change. They were scared about what it would mean for them, and so some people believe that's why he was assassinated.
Assassinated.
He was shot in the head.
Got killed.
John F. Kennedy was killed. It's very famous. You'll see him in an old car with no roof, with him and his wife, and someone with a sniper shot him in the head when he was driving in Dallas, Texas, November 22nd, 1963. After that, if you remember, the United States still went to the moon, but a lot of people after John F. Kennedy died were not as excited, and they thought, you know, maybe we shouldn't spend so much money. So after he died, there were a lot of problems, and a lot of problems for Martin Luther King and for the civil rights legislation as well. Thankfully, the next president did support the legislation, and it did get passed, but not as much as John F. Kennedy supported it. At the end, April 3rd, 1968, Martin Luther King gave a speech protesting the war in Vietnam. So, as you probably know, the United States was fighting a very famous war in Vietnam for a long time that was very horrible. Most people in the United States at that time didn't support the war, but the government did and the military did because they thought that it was necessary to try to fight communism from the Soviet Union. So it wasn't really a war against Vietnam, but it was the American military said a war against communism. It's not exactly that easy because the leaders of the Communist Party in Vietnam actually supported the United States Constitution a little bit more than the other side did. But anyway, talking about Vietnam is not, we don't have time for that. But anyway, Martin Luther King tried to protest the war in Vietnam. He said that the United States shouldn't be there. The United States was fighting against with the wrong side and that killing the wrong people. And after he said that, a lot of people got very angry at him. The American government got very angry at him. And a lot of people in the United States already hated him. And this didn't help with the government hating him as well. So eventually, April 4th, 1968, he went out on the balcony of his hotel, I think it was, and he was assassinated. He was shot in the head by, the government says, a man named James Earl Ray. If you watch videos of James Earl Ray, he said he never did it. So many people believe that it's not true that this man killed Martin Luther King. The investigation is not very clear still today, and most people think that the trial was not realistic. The lawyer didn't really try to find out what was going on, and many people believe that the government of the United States tried to kill Martin Luther King. Maybe not directly, but maybe by allowing someone to try or something like that. Many people believe that the government of the United
Who
States
will have benefit if Martin Luther King died?
Well, because he was very famous. And there were many African American people who were fighting in Vietnam. And if he said, if he convinced African American people to say stop fighting, then that could cause a lot of American casualties in Vietnam, and the amount of American military dying would go up, and there could be a lot of more protests and even more demands to withdraw, to leave Vietnam. Anyway, so he was assassinated. He was 39 years old, and he died when he was 39 years old. He gave a very famous speech before he died. It's something like, I have been to the mountaintop or something. And in the speech he says that I may not be able to see the end of this. He seems to think that he might be killed. It's hard to say, but in the speech he says that I'm not sure if I can follow you all to a better day, but I hope that a better day will come. So he was killed, and a lot of people were very sad. Still now, he was a great person. He was a very good speaker, and he was a really great American person. Many people asked him, why don't you go to another country? Because he had some money. He could have left the United States, but he said, no, I love the United States. We just need to change the laws that are wrong.
The laws can change. Finally,
finally there were civil
after
rights.
he died.
Yeah, after he died, there was civil rights legislation, and African American people gained the right to vote. And now we have some laws in the United States that do not allow for segregation anymore. And also, in the United States, you also can have a problem if you try to stop someone of another race from renting your house. So because of this, we had a problem where many people in America said, well, fine, you can do whatever you want, but if some African American person wants to rent my house, I'm going to say no. So the United States government had to stop that as well. So now in the United States, we have some equal housing laws. I'm not sure exactly what happens or what the law entails, but if it can be proven that you are stopping someone from renting your house or your property or working for you because they are African American, you can be taken to court. So in Thailand, that's very common, right? Like if I want to rent this building and the owner sees that I'm a Falang person, many times Thai people will say, no, Falang, no.
Really?
Yeah.
I think they like because you pay a lot.
Well, no, because sometimes they don't speak English, right? Or they don't trust people from another country. In the United States, that is considered racism. And so if you could prove, it's hard to prove it because you might, if you go to court, you say, well, I just didn't like him because I don't like him. But if there's some way to prove that you are trying to stop someone from working for you or for renting your property because they are a certain race, that can get you in trouble. And I think that's right. This is hopefully we have a couple more minutes. Hopefully the cameras last, but there's a couple more things that I hopefully have time to describe here. So there is a group in the United States called the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. They wear white hats.
Ku Klux Klan.
Yeah, they have white hats and they wear a mask. And usually their plan is to attack African American people, not just African American people, Jewish people or gay people or whatever, but you will see in some videos there are people with pointed white hats and a mask. Usually they cut out their eyes.
You showed me before.
I don't think I showed you, but you will see them. They are racists, and
I saw some.
And usually people in the
page.
United States consider that they are very racist people who hate other people from other countries, maybe even Asian people, maybe Thai people, I don't know, but usually not. At that time when Martin Luther King was protesting, there were many people in the KKK who tried to attack him or kill him or destroy his house or to stop.
And the police can help people.
Hopefully, but depending on the state. In some states, maybe the police didn't really care that there was segregation, and so if somebody was hurt or something, they didn't pay attention or they didn't care. Anyway, the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. So it was before Martin Luther King died, right? He died in 1968. So it was passed during his lifetime. Anyway, a couple more things. So I want to tell one story quickly about racism in the United States. About George Floyd. So then, as you remember, Black Lives Matter is the current protest in the United States. And it was because, you asked me on the show before, why there was protests in the United States. That was because George Floyd, there was an African American guy, and he was killed by police officers in the United States. They tried to hold him down. He was a big guy, he was a
Yes.
bouncer, but they held him down too hard, and one of the guys kneeled on his neck, and he died because he couldn't breathe. And people are angry in the United States because they feel like after Martin Luther King fought for so long, and a lot of people in the United States thought that things were better, George Floyd kind of showed maybe that things haven't gotten as good as some people were hoping. And so protests have begun again, and it's partly as a remembrance of Martin Luther King, and that racism and hatred can come back, and that you have to be vigilant and try to make sure that things don't go back to the way things were, and that the police and that the government are being fair. Like I said before, it's difficult. Not all police are racist in the United States. There are some, definitely. I have seen racism in the United States. Hopefully I'll have time to tell you a short story. But it's not easy. If you live in a dangerous city, you're a police officer, like I said before, and your family, doesn't want you to go to work, and you have a difficult life, and you think, I'm going to make sure I don't die in my work, and then the police get more violent and the people get more violent, and it turns into a very bad situation. But the police they're professionals. They're trained better. They have better weapons. They have better tactics. They should be on the side of decency, right? They should. It's on their side first to prove that they're doing what's right. And when they do that, then other people who are uneducated and unskilled can follow along. But it is the requirement of the police first to be on the right side. And many people believe that George Floyd proved that police were not being equal, and that this would not have happened to someone who was white. That's what many people believe. So that started the campaign that was Black Lives Matter, and that's what you asked me about on the show a long time ago. There were 3 states in the United States that Martin Luther King said were the worst: Mississippi, South Carolina, and Alabama. There's 50 states in the United States, and although Sipti thinks that I am from Chile. I am from the United States, but I have never lived in any of those 3 states before. Anyway, I just want to tell one quick racism story that I saw when I was a kid. Not a kid, but when I was growing up, to give you an example. So when I lived in California, I went on a train from California to New York, and then up to Toronto. But first we went to Detroit, because Detroit is the main train station in the United States. That's where all of the trains usually go before they go to their final destination. There's a huge train station there. So I went on the train from California to Detroit, and I was supposed to go in a very expensive room that I paid for, but the train that I was supposed to go on was broken. So they took that train car out, and they told me, if you want to go on this train today, you have to go in a seat. You can't go in the room. Or if you want to wait, then you can go next week. And I said, I don't want to wait till next week, I'll go now. So they said, the only place we have for you is a seat, a chair. You can't have a room. So I said, okay, whatever. It was 3 days. I said, it doesn't bother me. I'll sit on a seat. They said, we'll give you 2 seats, and we'll give you a partial refund, some of your money back, because the room was more expensive than seats. But they said, we'll give you 2 seats, and then you can kind of lay down on the seats. So I went on the train, and it was a third class seat. I didn't know there were third class seats on the train, but I went there, and I was the only white person in the whole train. It was all African American people going back to Detroit. I don't know if they were on vacation or what. Some of them, I heard them talking, they didn't like flying. Some of them just didn't like airplanes, but some of them didn't have any money, and some of them couldn't afford to fly. And it was just me, and everyone else in the train was African American people. And I wasn't scared, I wasn't nervous or anything. Everyone was very kind, everyone was very polite.
Kind with you?
Of course, yes, I wasn't scared. I grew up, my mom and my dad were not racist people, and racism is usually taught when you're very young. And if you grow up, my mom and my dad was drinking all the time, so he didn't know. And my mom
was friendly.
And my mom was not racist, so I never learned any of those things. But I wasn't worried to be on the train at all. When I was sitting there, I was like, oh, this is going to be a really bad trip because it's really far on the chair. But I had 2 seats, and everyone else had just one small seat with all of their baggage and all of their luggage. And so I was laying down pretty comfortably, and everyone else was not. So every morning, for 3 mornings, when we got to the border of the state, sometimes there are police checks. It's not as big as when you go into another country, but in the United States, on trains, they're afraid of drugs being moved, and so they bring police dogs to sniff people's bags.
Smell?
Yeah, to smell on the train. So every morning, for 3 mornings, the conductor, the boss of the train, would come and say, okay, everyone wake up at 6 in the morning. They don't do this if you have a room. Only in the poor seats do they do this. And the person said, get your bags, everyone get your bags ready because the police will check your bags. So I got my bag and I put it there on the seat next to me. And the policeman, he came in and he looked at me and he didn't check my bag. But he checked everybody else's bag on the train. The dog came in. The dog smelled my bag. The dog is not racist. The dog didn't care. But the policemen, when they saw me, they didn't even ask for my ID. But most everyone else on the train in that car, they asked for. They weren't mean. They didn't beat anyone. They didn't hurt anyone. But I mean, it was pretty obvious to me that this would not have happened in the more expensive area of the train. Now, you can say, well, John, that's not racism, that's poor. That can be true. You can also argue in the United States that there's racism and being poor is even worse than that. But the problem for African American people in the United States is that there's no money because they worked for free for hundreds of years. So all of the white people who made money for free off of their work have a lot of the resources now. Now I don't. My family was very poor, but not as poor as many African American people. So anyway, that was what I saw that was racist, and I was surprised. I didn't even know that there was a third class seat on the train, but I was there for 3 days, and every morning the police didn't check my bag, and they checked everyone else's. But like I said, they weren't mean. They didn't beat anyone. They didn't hurt anyone. But it's pretty obviously that they because I had a nice shirt, and I don't know what they thought. You know, what is he doing here or something? But
also,
yeah.
When police saw someone look back, they thought it's from Myanmar or something.
Right. Well, exactly. There's racism in many countries. It's not just the United States.
Yes.
But that was surprising to me, and I still remember it today. Anyway, any questions? I remember one other thing that Martin Luther King said that was very good was that he said, "An eye for an eye leaves everyone blind." So we have a saying in the United States, which is, maybe not in the United States, but in English, an eye for an eye. That means you hurt me, I'm going to hurt you. You hurt my eye, I'm going to hurt your eye. And he said that the reason why he was a pacifist and the reason why he didn't want to fight was because if I take your eye and then you take my eye and then I take your eye and you take my eye,
Not fair.
then no one's left who can see. So there's no point. Anyway, that's the end of the story of Martin Luther King. The reason why we talk about it is because it's very important still today. Many people in other countries don't understand what the protests are in the United States. Many TV stations, many governments in other countries don't understand how to describe this to people. And so people used to ask me all the time. And hopefully now you, by understanding some of the history, can understand a little bit what racism is and why people get angry, why they got angry, why they will get angry, and why there are still problems in the United States today. And there will be in all over the world. The United States is just one of the first places where a lot of different people have come together. And I think that racism is not just a problem in the United States, it will be a problem in many, many countries as more and more immigrants and more people choose to live in another place. There will be more and more racism, similar to in the United States. And hopefully people like Martin Luther King can do a good job of helping
Right
people
now
to
we
remember.
have someone like that guy in your country.
I don't think so. Martin Luther King was very special.
And Barack Obama.
Barack Obama was a president. Many people were excited to have him as president. Many people didn't like him as president. He was a good speaker, but he wasn't really fighting for civil rights like Martin Luther King was. Martin Luther King was not a president. He was just fighting for the rights of all human beings. Okay, so we talked too long. The battery lasts about a minute, an hour and 15 minutes, and we went far over that. But this is very complicated and we didn't have enough time. So unfortunately, you have to mind the cut in the video. Anyway, at the end there, I was just saying that Martin Luther King is a very iconic figure, and it's very hard to find someone who has anything bad to say about Martin Luther King. And we have a holiday in the United States, Martin Luther King Day, and to celebrate.
Day for that guy.
Yeah, to celebrate Martin Luther King's life. But he is dead. So remember, like I said in the beginning, even when you're a great even when you're a great person who does an amazing job of talking about racism, sometimes you still lose. And he died fighting for the cause. So even he was...
We should be careful.
Right. Even he did not escape racism. Anyway, any questions, Sipti, about... Sipti had one question. What was it? When the cameras were off? Can we get to it quickly?
I saw in 8 video about George, or what you...
George Floyd?
Yeah. I saw one of the police is Asian...
Was
Asian person.
Was
an Asian person.
Okay.
I want to know how can people in other countries can be or can work in your country.
Right.
Like police or soldier or nurse,
Yes.
doctor.
So remember, the United States is all immigrants. So my family came from Italy and from Iceland, from the UK. So people came from China to work on the railroad. People were brought from Africa as slaves. There were many immigration waves that came to the United States from different times. So that Asian guy that you're talking about, he may look Asian, but he was born in the United States and probably his family lived in the United States for a very long time. He speaks English perfectly, I'm
Yes.
sure, and he looks Asian only. He is an American citizen. So it's a little bit different. It's not like he came from China and he's working in the American police force. No, I'm sure that he's an American citizen. So he looks Asian, but he's probably mixed between many races.
Big guy. Big
Yeah,
guy.
exactly. But your question is, can people move to America and become a policeman? It would be very hard. No one would want to do it. If you came from Thailand and you wanted to be an American policeman, there's not really that much money in it. There's not really any benefit. American people can do the job. It doesn't really make sense for anyone to want to do that.
If soldier.
Sometimes the American military will give people citizenship if they were soldiers, but we don't have that anymore because usually the military is paid well and they usually have enough people to join the military. Right now, they don't have a lack of people, so they're not really desperate right now to find people. A lot of the military requires high education now to use the weapon systems that they have. So it's not as there's a lot of special forces now that are very highly trained, and so it's not like in World War II. It's a little bit more sophisticated than that. So not anyone can just in the United States there are some requirements. You have to be a certain height. You have to be a certain weight. If you have flat feet, you can't join the military. If you have some type of heart problem or something, you're not going to be able to do it. It's not that easy to join. I mean, it's pretty easy, but no one would want to do it except for the pay, and so it's unlikely that anyone would do that.
Okay.
That guy in the video was just an American citizen. He probably had a mom or dad who long time ago was from
The way he
another country.
moved or talked like American people.
I don't remember him speaking, but I'm just saying that the chance that he came from China and joined an American police force, no, that's not going to happen. He was born in the United States, and he grew up there, yeah, and he probably does not speak any other languages except English, yeah. Anyway, that's the end of our show about Dr. Martin Luther King. If you can watch his speeches and you can understand them, you would enjoy them. And that's the end of our history lessons. I'm sure everyone's yawning, everyone's thankful that it's done, everyone's, over at last, over at last. People are saying, thank God Almighty. John's stories are over at last. So anyway, remember racism, hatred, all of forgotten dates. I'm sure I made a lot of mistakes during the lesson, but hopefully Sipti learned something along the way. Oh, so quickly before we end, so Sipti, when someone shows you this picture someday, what are you going to say? Who is this?
This is Martin Lawaba.
Oh
King.
no! Oh no!
Martin King.
Martin Luther King.
Martin Luther King
Jr.
Jr. Who was leader to
not
protest
to
leader
of
of protest
the
the pro-
it's called the civil rights movement
the
so civil means like
civil rights movement.
yeah so civil like people rights and movement organization so the people's the laws to help people movement the laws to help people group so he was the leader of the civil rights movement
He
in the United
was
States
the leader of the civil rights movement. Blah blah. What?
in the United States
International.
yes right
In
fighting for what
Fighting for black,
African American
for African American
rights
rights
in the United States yes
in United States.
I'm not sure Sifty will pass the Martin Luther King test, but I think that actually you know much better than most people actually in other countries now, hopefully, because of this. Thank you so much, Sifty.
Thank
Any
you.
questions?
No.
If you want to see Sifty being sprayed by a water hose or dogs attack, I'm going to send the dogs to attack Sifty. Make sure to add her on Instagram.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
ขอบคุณค่ะ
Bye bye.